Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to the Adamancipator test hand video for November 2020. So this is actually going to be a very detail-oriented video, but then again, what video of mine isn't? So this is actually going to be broken down into several parts for you guys. So I'm just going to give you a brief roadmap / outline so you can understand where we're going here. So first, we're going to be doing 5 test hands that are completely uncut. None of this is going to be edited. I'm just going to let the replay from solo mode kind of play through, and I'll walk through my kind of line of thought here. And this is going to obviously be showcasing the consistency of the deck and how we play out specific hands assuming no disruption. But of course, that is a kind of flawed practice because your opponent is most likely going to have disruption. So that's why in the later sections of this video, we're going to be going over how we play through hand traps in either single hand traps or multiple hand traps, and even going through board breakers and power cards. So I'll have that, of course, broken down into various sections in the video so you guys can jump ahead to wherever you guys would like to if you want to reference this later on. So in total, there are going to be 20 test hands throughout this entire video. The first 5 are going to be the uncut ones where I just mentioned we're playing against 0 disruption essentially. Then the next 4 will be assuming your opponent has 1 hand trap. The next 3 test hands are going to be against 2 hand traps, and there's going to be 1 test hand after that against 3 hand traps. And then following that, we're going to be doing board breakers. So there will be 3 test hands against 1 board breaker, and then 1 test hand against 2 board breakers. I did fewer of these because they actually become a bit redundant, and you'll kind of see that as we get later on into that section of the video. But then finally, we're going to be looking at specifically combinations of the powerful cards in those categories. So we'll be combining the best ones and then sort of testing to see how well we can do against combinations of the power cards towards the end. So as you can probably tell, this is going to be a very long and in-depth video. So if you guys do happen to enjoy this sort of detail-oriented, long-form content that is on the competitive side of things, definitely consider giving the video a like, as well as just sharing it around with friends who you feel might also enjoy this style of video. Subscribe if you are new here and enjoy the competitive side of the game. And if you guys want to help directly support my ability to bring this type of video to you guys much more frequently for a variety of decks for upcoming formats and such, definitely head over to my Patreon and check that out as well, because the more support we can get over there, the more likely I'll be able to actually invest more time, because these obviously taking a very long time to produce. So if you guys want to maybe request various decks in the future, I would be happy to do so if I have the means to. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. Alright, so since all 5 of these test hands are actually consolidated into one replay here, we can actually go ahead and just hit the play button and let it go in real time, and I can just commentate over it. Hopefully I won't be able to have many takes. I want this to be completely unedited, at least for the first section of it, so you guys can kind of just get a sense for what my mindset was at. But I do want to note one thing, is that if you guys haven't seen the deck profile, definitely go ahead and do that. I'll leave a link in the description box. And if you guys have seen that, you'll notice I made actually a bit of a change in that I actually added the 3 copies of Tenyi Spirit Adhara. I just did find that, like you guys were mentioning in the comments, that the deck could use some more extension, and I thought Adhara would be the best one given the way that I built the deck. So I cut, I believe, Harpy's Feather Duster, Monster Reborn actually, and I cut a copy of the Quacky Mirror Overload as well. And I also swapped back the ratio of Dragite and Supplier, so I'm back on 3 Supplier, 2 Dragite. Like I said, I'm just swapping between that all the time. But for this series of games, or test hands rather, I went back on the 3-2 ratio for Supplier Dragite. So you can see the first test hand here, we open the Adhara, and it actually ends up being pretty good here, simply because if we do miss off this Analyzer, it ends up being a very good sort of backup. Of course, Analyzer is going to grab us a copy of Supplier. I did end up dropping the non-tuner rock count down by 1. If you guys did watch that deck profile, you notice I was pretty mathematically driven in terms of wanting specifically 13 non-tuner rocks. Having 12 can actually kind of ruin the percentages a little bit, because you're very likely to open at least one of them, more than likely 2. But yeah, just by having 10 to 11 rather than, like, say 11 to 12 non-tuner rocks in your deck, it becomes a lot harder to actually, not a lot harder, but it becomes a little less consistent to sort of hit the monsters that you need to off your excavates. But you saw that I went for Fiber off the Supplier and the Adhara here, leaving the level 4 tuner on board just in case, because oftentimes the non-tuners we are excavating, of course, level 4 as well, so I can help make Savage easier. Going to Fiber, summoning out Plague. Normally I bring out Plague if I don't open a copy of Signs, simply because Plague is better if you go for the integrator line, as I'm about to go for here. You say went for metal and then went for Cyber's Integrator. Because if you happen to draw the Red Ice Fusion, which I know is a 1 in 32 chance here, I guess I actually missed the draw. Huh. That's kind of funny. I guess I forgot to draw here. I totally didn't even notice that. That's pretty hilarious, actually. But yeah, definitely don't forget to draw there. But if you like hit the very low percentage chance to draw the Red Ice Fusion, you want to be able to put that back. And also, like, signs is like the main reason why you would want to summon an Adamancipator tuner off of your what's it called, fiber. So yeah, I go ahead and grab Doki. I can't believe I actually forgot to draw, but you know, too little too late, I suppose. But hey, that just proves that we can still play even without playing the deck to its max capacity. But yeah, no, there's no justifying that. Definitely don't forget to draw there. I have no idea why I forgot. Whoops. But we're going to go ahead and go Doki for Guardian and then use the Analyzer and the Doki for Leonite. That's going to grab us a copy of Researcher, which is actually very good because we haven't used it yet. I really, really do like Leonite quite a lot in this deck. It's just such a very, very good tool to be able to actually grab you access to various different like plays during your opponent's turn, and it's like some of the best follow-up you could have. So I think honestly it's a very undervalued card. Here we actually special the Researcher off its own effect and grab a copy of Crystal Leonite, which is very fortunate because we weren't able to summon Almirage at all during this point in time. So we had to, because we like went special and then normal the Analyzer, and obviously it's too much attack. So we want the Fire Engraved so we can go ahead and bring back like a copy of Guardian after we use it, or just bring back this one that's already engraved. So at this point, we have a couple of options here. We can just go straight for Verite Anaconda, which is fine. There's not really another Synchro 6 that's really worth going into. So, you know, figure, might as well just kind of leave it there. And then we just go ahead and summon our Dragoon, and that is essentially going to conclude it for this combo. We didn't end up using the Plague in this specific hand, but there are times where you definitely do want it. I accidentally banished the materials here by accident, but yeah, this gets sent to grave. I'm so used to having Herald up at certain points. But yeah, at least this does leave Plague as a good follow-up, and I am supposed to have an additional card in hand because of obviously the Cyber's Integrator, and we can reveal for end phase because we have the extra Guardian. So yeah, us shuffling everything back, you guys can see this is proof that this is not edited. I just went ahead and did all these test hands in one shot. So we're gonna go ahead and go into our second test hand, which is Doki, Guardian, Imperm, Plague, and Dark Magician. So noticeably, it is a pretty weak hand to hand traps, which, you know, we're going to get into that later, of course, is like what happens if you run into hand traps. The hands are generally pretty strong, but it can happen if you don't open optimally. That is just the nature of variance. But, you know, you got to do the best with what you got here. In the case of just an isolated circumstance, Analyzer hitting any level 4 is pretty decent because you can forego the Cyber's Integrator line and just go for the Herald into the Wrap type play. And if you're like me, like last time, and forgot to draw, then it's certainly the better outcome. But yeah, definitely don't forget to draw. I don't forget to draw, I don't believe. I would hope not, at least for the rest of these test hands. But yeah, definitely, that is kind of embarrassing, not gonna lie. But we're gonna move on here. We're gonna go for Link Cross after summoning a Researcher. I know I said that I normally summon Plague if I don't have signs, but I really just didn't want to waste a card in hand. Plus, I wasn't planning on drawing anyway, because again I was going for the... sorry, I got so tongue-tied there. We're going for the Herald into the Wrap type play instead of the Cyber's Integrator play, so we don't need to risk like drawing the Red Ice Fusion there. But here after Wrap type, we hit the copy of Seeker, which is very good for extending, and we're going to be able to just keep going here. We go for a copy of Guardian, and obviously, you know, it's very, very much dependent on what you hit off your Excavates, which makes the deck non-linear, and you can't really prepare necessarily for situations, but there are, to some extent, you can play around with what resources you have left in deck if you can keep track. Here we go for the Leonite, linking away the Guardian, or rather synchroing it away, because we already have the Herald, so like it's fairly safe to do it this way. And because we had like not gone through signs yet, we hadn't revealed too many of them, it was a pretty decent chance we were going to hit the signs off of this Leonite. So we're going to pick that up here, which is very, very nice indeed. And we already had the Crystal Leonite as well, which is pretty good here. So that's actually a really fortunate thing that we did summon the Researcher, because now we're able to bring it back off of these signs and then use its effects, because we weren't able to do it before, obviously because of Martial Metal Marcher and fiber restrictions. So that's very good. This is the point where like you would normally stack the Leonite, but we already went through a single copy, and even if we didn't, we already used the Risen Leonite to get here to begin with, because you'll see this in later combos, or rather later test hands as well, but there are a lot of times where I go and stack the Crystal Leonite so I can combo into Risen Leonite, and I'll explain how that works as we get there. But I do the Dragite instead, and Dragite's going to just net us an additional draw. I know that runs contrary to the whole reason of not going the Cyberse Integrator play, but we're just hoping that we don't hit the 1 in 28 chance here, basically. We could even opt to not go for the draw if we really want to avoid drawing the Red Ice Fusion. Oh, I believe what happened here was, I think I accidentally shuffled my deck. Yeah, I did accidentally shuffle my deck, so I went back and I actually re-banished everything. So I'll just click next play for this. You guys don't need to see this. I just want to fix that. But yeah, we went ahead and went for a draw off the Dragite. Luckily, it was not one of the... I guess it would be 1 in 24 chance, since we know the bottom 4 aren't going to be Red Ice Fusion in that case. But still, very low chance that we were going to draw the Red Ice Fusion there, which would have been quite sad, because that would have made our board significantly weaker. But we go for the Veritana Kana here. You definitely should be summoning Leonite in defense, just because like you have the capability of playing around Lightning Storm, because you're putting Herald and you're putting Raptite in defense always anyways, and Dragoon obviously resists Lightning Storm, so you might as well just have none of your board besides the Verite, which you don't care about, lose to the Lightning Storm, because like, you know, why would you bother doing that if you don't have to? But that's basically 4 interruptions, because we did have the Crystal Leonite engrave, and I believe we had a Guardian as well. Yeah, we synchroned it away. And also, I just noticed after the second test hand that I didn't reset my life points, so minor issue there, or minor mistake, but not really that big of a deal. We start off with Adhara and Guardian, which is not a great hand again, but I mean, you're not always going to open your minors, right? So this is what happens actually if you open Fiber plus Signs. So actually, this is a great thing to talk about. So if you have any way to go Fiber into Signs, you summon a level 2 tuner off of the Fiber. It should actually be Seeker in case you like rip a Researcher later, like off one of your draws. But you go for the Marcher, you bring back the Researcher, and then you go for the copy of Cyberse Integrator. You go for the Integrator plus the Marcher line, and then you go for the Raptite. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't miss a draw this time, so thankfully that did not happen. We draw another copy of Ash, which is like okay. But here what you do is you signs back your level 2 Adamancipator tuner, and then you stack the Crystal Leonite, and this is very important. And this is my strongest case for playing this card, because I think this is just such a strong combo. You're gonna see. But we're gonna go ahead and Researcher. Obviously, we hit the Crystal Leonite, and we're going to take that over the Dragite. It's much better here. So because we open the signs, we can actually use Leonite to stack the signs from our graveyard back on the top of our deck. And since we now know that's on top of our deck, we can just synchro those two away for a copy of Risen Leonite. And what do you know? We stacked the signs, so we can just hit it off the top. We add it back to our hand, and the best part of this is that we haven't used our Raptite yet. So we can use the signs and do something a little bit unintuitive here with it. I think it takes me actually a little while to set this up. But yeah, we can go ahead and signs back the Crystal Leonite. And we can actually stack yet again, because it still is an Adamancipator monster. So we can stack Analyzer that we haven't used. As long as you didn't use Analyzer to initially get into Fiber to begin with, this play definitely works. So you can Raptite, because you haven't used it yet, back the Analyzer, and then you can use Analyzer's effect, which is very likely going to just get you whatever errant rock monster. It really doesn't matter what it is. Supplier is fine here. And we can incidentally get the Supplier effect here as well. But you can see that because we did it this way, we now have a level 4 tuner and a level 4 non-tuner. So we were able to, after I eventually search Guardian, takes me a little while here, we can eventually actually just go into a copy of Borrowed Savage, and we can Savage equip the Fiber. So the best thing is that with the Martial Metal Marcher, you have the Wind Engrave for the Raptite. I guess I never really explained the end board at all, but like this gets you a DD Crow on your opponent's turn. This specific line with like Fiber plus Signs gets you the Crystal Leonite Engrave always, because you're always stacking it. So you'll always be able to get back a rock monster from your graveyard, whether it be like a Guardian that you need to use, or what have you. Like say your Raptite gets cleared, you can like bring it back. But yeah, you'll be able to end on all of this, guaranteed, besides obviously the Ash and the Imperm, off of just the back of Fiber plus Signs. So I definitely think that's a case to be playing the Leonite stuff. That's all I'm going to say here. Like, definitely should be playing the Leonite package, in my opinion. So with that said, we're going on to the fourth test hand here, and you know, this is not a great hand, but we have 3 hand traps, and that's the beauty of it. So even if we get hand trapped here, we at least have hand traps ourselves, so that's like decent enough. Here we pick up a copy of Dragite. Not really any reason to go for anything else. Like Guardian would get synchroed away or linked away anyways. There's not really any value we're getting off of that. And we didn't have anything to pitch off Doki either. So we draw a copy Analyzer. That's like fine, not amazing, not terrible. Here we can just go ahead and go for the normal Cybers Integrator play that we would go for. It kind of amazes me that there are some people who still aren't playing Cybers Integrator, because like in spots like this, it's just super nice to have. I guess you could just go Herald Dragoon, but I mean, you might as well just try and extend your ceiling a little bit. I don't know. I just feel like, because like you're gonna get Nibiru'd anyway once you go for like the Marcher stuff, or even just on Resolution of Linkcross. Like you're not playing around Nibiru regardless. So I don't know. I just feel like you might as well try and go for the increased ceiling just a little bit, because any way to be able to find something like a Doki, which can use the card that we drew off the Integrator, aka Analyzer, because that was a card that we picked up, I do believe, and like we can use those cards to be able to just get even more resources and just keep going here. Like you can turn a board that was like very little into a much bigger board that you didn't have previously. So I don't know. I just think that like since the deck already is super reliant on just having a high ceiling and you just kind of committing all your resources, like you might as well just go all the way, right? Like if you're just going for a Fiber combo with like Herald and Dragoon, you could just play like Eldritch or something, and that would be totally fine, right? I feel like the point of this deck is you're just trying to make a much bigger board. But here we go for the Leonite, and we actually rip a copy of Signs again. Like you actually have such a high chance of getting Signs. Like it's not a low probability if you didn't open with it, because you're playing 3 of it. So like this card just gets a lot of value, and even in a case where like we got Researcher, like that's another 3 cards that we could have gotten off this Leonite. We could just special it and then just keep going, you know. So there's a lot of really opportune moments to be able to actually just increase your deck's ceiling. Because like worst case scenario, say like your Raptite misses, like you'll still have Plague, so you'll end on Dragoon plus Raptite, which is like not the same as Dragoon Herald, but like a DD Crow is still very valuable in a lot of matchups. You know, you can hit things like Qinglong, you can hit things like Miscellaneous Saurus. It just has wide applications in a lot of different matchups, and it's not as vulnerable to just Battle Phase attack over, right? It's 28 defense. But yeah, here we're able to go ahead and just synchro away the Leonite this time around, because we actually, well, no, we just normal summoned the Seeker, right? We didn't go normal Dragite Special Seeker, we went just normal Seeker, and then we hit the Dragite off of it, yeah. So we were never able to actually get Almirage into Grave, which can be a little bit of a problem sometimes with leaving this card up. But we actually do have Ash in hand, which serves as our fire monster, which is cool. So like at any point we can use Ash, this turns back on the Leonite, and then we can bring back a Guardian. So like this is just a lot of really good stuff we have at our disposal. So we end on Dragoon. We can also Dragoon pitch the second Ash too. We have Dragoon, we have this bringing back Guardian, we have this negate, we have DD Crow, we have Ash Imperm, Nibiru. Like we have so many interruptions here. And that's just off the back of, you know, instead of going just Herald Dragoon off like Fiber, you can go for the full thing and it ends up working out. So the last test hand here is going to be a very wonky one, but again, it's just a way to get Fiber plus Signs. You know, like you love seeing this type of hand. So like you can see this deck is still relatively consistent. Like it can definitely brick from time to time, but like this was 5 hands that were completely just unedited. Like I just went for it, and here we are, right? So like these hands are just all very good. I mean, they're not all, you know, invincible to like 2-3 hand traps or even 1 hand trap in some cases earlier, but you know, you have some resiliency and you are able to at least play the game every single time pretty much. So that's why I do enjoy this deck in particular. I definitely think you have to play 40 just because like you want your Excavates to hit, you want to be able to draw your power cards, you want to be able to draw your tuners specifically. You just have to draw like the best cards. But yeah, here we went for, I think we started off with Seeker. And then I summoned a researcher off fiber. I didn't quite catch it. I was just busy talking because, you know, I tend to do that. But we are going to go ahead and go for the integrator line again because we did draw signs. Again, we do kind of run the risk. I meant to use integrator, not trigger Raptite there. I accidentally clicked the declare button. But again, you do run a minor risk of getting the Red Ice Fusion to your hand, which does suck, and it will happen in later hands. I do remember distinctly that there was an instance where that actually did end up biting me as well. But we do have Plague Spreader to help mitigate that to some degree, so that's like not even that bad of a thing. Here we are, of course, going for signs, bringing back the researcher that we hadn't used yet, and then stacking the Leonite, the Crystal Leonite. Now this does get actually a little bit trickier because this Guardian actually will eat up a space, and we're going to run into the Infernoble problem, which is we clog up our board, and then we have too many monsters, and our board becomes a bit too big. But I mean, that's a better problem to have than, you know, just not being able to play at all, right? So you can see, you know, Risen Leonite adding back the signs, even though we had a second one, but like just to demonstrate why this loop is super, super good. We're just going to be able to abuse this interaction again where we bring back the Leonite and then go for the Analyzer, which we incidentally haven't used or hadn't used again. But like, even if we had used it here, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because we wouldn't really need the Excavate at this point. So yeah, we're going to just be able to use the Raptite. That's going to bring back the Analyzer, or bring out the Analyzer that we stacked. And then here we have a choice because we do have the signs here, so we can kind of play with our resources a little bit. I kind of fumble here towards the end where I like try and figure out what the best course of action is, and I kind of like, you know, rewind things to see if there was a different line of play I could have taken, but I think I ultimately still settle on this line. Yeah, here I kind of like backtrack and see, was there a better thing I could have done? Because I was considering like maybe I should have blinked away like maybe the Leonite for the Link, or with the Link Frost for the Verte first. And I decide, actually I think that is what I decided to do because there's a high chance of hitting a level 4. And if I don't, I can just bring back the Leonite here anyways. So I just decided to do this instead. This is probably the better play. Just because again, you're fishing for level 4 non-tuner rocks most of the time with your miners anyways. And again, worst case scenario, you like if you even hit like a Doku, you could just like decline to summon because it's optional, and then you could just like bring back something with signs and then go Savage here anyways. So like it would have been effectively the same result, just you have to burn signs in the case that you whiff. But if you don't whiff, then you get to keep the signs in your hand. You have to burn it. Because I was like gonna link away. You saw I was gonna link away like the Leonite for this Verite Anaconda, and then bring it back off the signs. I'm like, I don't have to actually do that because that's just a waste. Because like, if I was just gonna do that, and then we've had the Crystal Leonite and the Analyzer on board, you know, it would have been like Analyzer getting a random level 4, and then what? Like, it wouldn't have amounted to anything. So this is like the best end board. It's like kind of crazy that the last combo ended up probably being the best board, apart from like the hand traps, which we didn't have too many of besides Ash here. But like this is like basically max ceiling, right? You have Omni Negate off Dragoon, you have Omni Negate off of Savage, you have a Monster Negate with Guardian, you have a DD Crow with Raptite, which is my favorite interruption, by the way, because I just love DD Crow. And then you can use Leonite to bring back the Guardian after it tributes itself. So that's a 5th interruption, and you have Ash, which is a 6th interruption. So like very, very like plausible to do this. Obviously, again, it's through no interruption, but we are going to move into the next section here, which is going to be through for hand traps. But like you can just see the potency of this deck, and of course, having the Adhara here. Thank you guys for highly recommending that I retest this card because I was testing it. I didn't like it before, but I found ways to kind of integrate it into the way that I wanted to play the deck, and that is why, you know, we have the comment section, right? We're here to learn, of course, both myself and for you guys. So that is the entire purpose of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But we're going to move on again into the next section, which is going to be playing through hand traps. So see you in just a bit. Alright, so welcome to part 2 of the video, which is going to be showcasing various test hands versus several different hand traps. So like I mentioned at the start, we're going to be first demonstrating how we can play against 1 hand trap, followed by 2, and then moving on to 3 eventually. So the way I'm going to be structuring this is, you can see I'm on the screen here, where we're picking first versus second. So I got on an alternate account to kind of just help me facilitate this process. So we're going to start with just a random hand. You can see just from that screen, we're not changing anything about this opening hand here. But what we're going to do is actually take the most popular and prevalent hand traps according to Dueling Book, like on yugioh, at least the ones that interact with our deck very well. We're going to, you know, put them into the opposite hand, the opposing hand here. And then we're going to assign each of these hand traps to a number. And you'll see me assign these on the right here. And then basically I'm going to be rolling a dice and then seeing which one comes up, and that's the hand trap we'll be playing against with this given hand. So by doing it this way, I'm not like manipulating which hand trap is going to be played against whichever hand. It's what I get is what I have to play against. And similarly for the next sort of test hands with multiple hand traps, we'll be just rolling multiple dice, and then just getting different hand traps for different numbers. But we got Crow for this round, so that means that we have to kind of contend against how that interrupts our Martial Meta Marcher play. You can see we can just go for Analyzer into Seeker as per normal, because we're not really going to have to worry about that until later on. But here with the Dragon, we can just pick up and try and draw more extenders. Now, it really does depend on how you want to play this, like as in terms of how you want the exercise to go, because obviously we could just negate the Crow with the Guardian that we just ripped off the Seeker here, but in practice, right, if you can try and just play straight up through the Crow and reserve this for something like Nibiru or maybe Gamma later, that's obviously going to be a more fruitful use of your Guardian. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that obviously if it's hard to kind of simulate hand traps if what you're playing against is known versus what is unknown, which is going to always be the case in actuality. But you can try and just do your best to actually mimic the real life experience here. But you can see that we went for Fiber into summoning Plague, and then we went ahead and summoned out the Link Cross, going for tokens, going for Marcher to target the Plague, and that's going to be the point to DD Crow. Now, you could argue that when I went to the Fiber initially, I could have also summoned Supplier, which would have clogged my board if the Supplier resolved, because it would be Fiber, Seeker, Supplier, and Plague. But then I could just turn one of the tuners plus the Supplier into the Raptite early, and then go for Marcher, and then go for Herald and have a level 2 tuner on board, which would also diminish the impact of Crow. But I would also have a Herald on board instead of the play I'm about to go for, which is the Integrator, which is still fair because I'm able to get a draw off of it this way. But again, it's kind of similar to just the normal, if you have a level 4 extender body on board, you can go for Herald Raptite instead of going for Integrator. It's just that with this specific line of play, I could have actually technically gone for both. And it's not really that weak to Nibiru since again we had the Guardian. But either way, we got DD Crowed, which reduces the ceiling a little bit, but not that significantly. You can see that I believe we drew an Ash off of this the Cyberse Integrator, and then we're going to go for Raptite afterward. And we can just kind of continue going with our plays here. We have quite a myriad of options. I'm kind of thinking here if I actually want to go for the Leonite, because we already used Seeker. So we could actually just search a Researcher off this Gallant Granite. We have used that card very, very little so far. So this would be a good chance to kind of showcase its utility, of course. I accidentally misclicked and sent it to Grave, but, Dueling Book happens. We're going to go ahead and, of course, grab our copy of Researcher here. Then we can just go ahead and special the Researcher, no problem, and then see how far we can get. Worst case scenario, we could just go for Dragoon afterward and keep the Granite on board for further follow-up. But what we did want to hit is just, of course, any non-tuner level 4. So we can go for Risen Risen Leonite, which is, again, just one of my favorite cards to go with this deck, because we already hit the Crystal Leonite earlier. I do believe it was off the Raptite. So I really like the ability to just have follow-up at the ready for next turn. And then even though we link away the Granite here, it's not that bad because Leonite is also follow-up in its own right. It'd be nice to be able to have both, but yeah, we already used our Seeker effect to special this turn. So we're just going to go ahead and go for Verite Anaconda. And this represents another form disruption, of course, because bringing back the Guardian is a very, very good interaction. So yeah, we can have phase reveal for Guardian, and this is our board through the DD Crow. So obviously our hand was very strong there, and it was able to play through it pretty nicely, because whenever you open combinations of multiple minors, tuners that is, you're able to actually progress very well. And we have 2 hand traps to back it up. So let's move into the second example. We're going to do much the same thing. It was quite time consuming to actually set all of this up, just because I had to kind of reassign the numbers each time, just so that in case you guys want to skip around, you can just have a visual reference. So I'll fast forward this part. So yeah, this hand right here is it just depends on what kind of hand trap we have to run into. And in this case, we actually got Gamma, which is a super high impact hand trap, as you guys know. So when you have to play around Gamma, or when you're trying to play around Gamma, you have to be very careful. I accidentally hit the pause button. But yeah, like, so instead of using Doki right away, you definitely want to special your researcher first. And then there's multiple ways that your opponent can use Gamma. They can like Gamma the researcher, which I kind of like talk about here, or like kind of showcase, so I can talk about it right now. So like you can get Gammaed at that point, like either on the researcher hand effect or the field effect. Probably the field effect just because it's hard once return. But then you can just Doki, pitch the other researcher, get Seeker out of deck, and then that just gets you pretty much to Fiber, which gets you like all the way there, like most of the way there, as long as you like get a decent hit off of Raptite or a draw off of Integrator. So like with that knowledge, your opponent might choose a Gamma, and obviously we already know based on like just this given hand how that would turn out. So I wanted to save Gamma for like a thought experiment, like what if they reserve the Gamma for a later point in our play. So that is kind of the mentality here. Most players probably would choose the Gamma the researcher, and just hope that we didn't have an extender, or like a way to pitch Doki to actually get something meaningful on board, which isn't that high of a percentage chance, but it's probably better than letting researcher possibly hit like a Guardian and then not being able to Gamma at all. So I do think that in most cases people would probably hit the researcher. But in any case, we are going to use researcher, and that gets a copy of supplier to our field, which in sequence gets Guardian to our hand. So this is again pretty decent setup because we're able to just freely go into Fiber from this point forward. We can also just go Doki because we picked up the Guardian off of the supplier and then grab another Guardian right there. So then at this point, like your opponent would have to Gamma. So it's like they either have to Gamma the researcher, or in which case they lose without its only hand trap because we get Seeker and we get to play anyway. Or they have to Gamma here because if they let Guardian go on the board, then they can't Gamma at all. So yeah, if Gamma is the only hand trap against this specific hand, then you actually are in a very good spot. So that's like a couple different ways that you can think about playing around Gamma. Like there's several different points to sort of think about when your opponent will be using it. So just keep that in mind. It's obviously harder when like you also don't know what you're going to hit off your excavates, but like with the knowledge that if you have Doki setups, you can hit either supplier or Guardian off of your miner and you'll be like good to go, then that's like a very, very safe sort of process to think about. Now we're of course going to just go Fiber, and then we're going to go for Integrator. We lost our body off Doki, which prevented us from going for a Herald line. Because like if we just went Doki plus the the researcher into the Fiber and left the supplier on board, then we can go for the Herald Raptite play that we often like to do. I forgot what we picked up here. I think it was just another Guardian. Let me check real fast. We drew Quackimera Guardian, yeah. So actually what I do here is I use Plague early just to guarantee that Raptite will hit, because I want to ensure that I at least have the body to work with. We do of course hit the Seeker in the end, but even though the probability is low, you still can technically whiff, so better take that chance because the Guardian's not really doing anything in hand at that point anyways. So we can now use the Seeker, which is going to get the copy of Supplier to our board, and we already used this effect so we can't search again. So we're just going to be using it as a body, of course. And we have several different options here as well, and I'm sure you guys can probably guess by now which one I'm going to be going for, but of course it's going to be naturally going for the Risen Leonite. So I just really, really highly value this card quite a lot. Like when you have Ash in hand, or you have Crystal Leonite Engrave, or Almirage Engrave, it's just super, super good working with the Quackimeras, specifically Guardian, that it just allows you to... It just gets you a lot farther ahead as far as setting up for the next turn, because again, it just represents extra follow-up, and it is a disruption in its own right. And it gets us follow-up to our hand this turn, right now, so we get like even more follow-up. Even if this doesn't like survive, for example, it really did its job in getting us follow-up, right? So we're able to just go ahead and link away the Link Frost and the Plague Spreader. That's going to get us a copy of the Verite Anaconda, and we're going to of course just summon out our Dragoon here. So you can see that even through Gamma, like we were pretty safe from Gamma no matter which point with this given hand. So like again, whether they chose to do it earlier or later, like there would be a point where it'd be forced out essentially, and then you can just capitalize on that by having just the flexibility of having the right sequencing, right? So as long as you summon the researcher first, you are in a good spot there. And not to mention we have the hand traps, and I'm just using the counters here to showcase that we of course are going to have the Fire Engrave for Leonite to become a disruption. So still 5 disruptions through the Gamma. which is going to be very hard for opponents to contend with, and we have amazing follow-up for next turn. So moving into the third example here, we are going to be, of course, doing this exercise yet again. So just going to fast forward through this part. But the hand we get is going to be Doki, Adhara, Signs, Nibiru, Leonite, so no tuners. And our Doki doesn't have anything really that good to use, because the only rock that we can pitch Nib, I guess, but that doesn't really do a whole lot. And then we're only playing one Leonite, so we have to play through Imperm with this hand, and that can be tricky, but we did draw Signs at the very least, so we can make something work a little bit. It's not going to be a great board, but it's going to at least be something, which is, of course, one of the advantages of playing the Dragoon package. Unfortunately, that basically is all we're going to be able to do. So we're going to go ahead and go for Adhara. And I actually have to normal summon the Leonite here, just so I can keep Doki as a potential follow-up if I like top deck any level 4 Earth Rock. But yeah, if our Fiber gets Impermed here, then we don't really have a whole ton to do, because all we're able to really do is just go for Anaconda and hope it's good enough. We do have Nibiru, which is like good insurance, but yeah, I mean, you're not always going to open a strong hand. Like we're able to play through Gamma last hand, which is like a really strong hand trap, and then this is a lower impact hand trap, and our hand this time just couldn't play through it, like pretty much whatsoever. So again, like it just definitely depends, and not every hand is going to be perfect, which is why I want to just showcase this off. So like that's definitely important to know. Oh yeah, also I put back the Signs off the Leonite just so I can possibly top deck into it later. But yeah, we're just going to go for Verte and then just summon out Dragoon, which is not the prettiest, but it is at least something. And even though it's not a high percentage chance you're going to win the game, depending on how good your opponent's hand is, it gives you more of an opportunity to than if you weren't playing the Dragoon package. I'm sure most people who are playing Rocks right now are playing this engine, but just for the people who aren't right now, it is nice to have that as a backup. So moving on into the final hand for one hand trap specifically, we're going to be seeing what we can do here. So our opener this time is going to be Dark Magician, Dragite, Imperm, Researcher, and Ghost Ogre. So not an amazing hand, but it's good enough to combo here, and we have two hand traps to boot, which is always nice. Like again, you always want to have hand traps just in case you get hand trapped yourself. And you can see we hit 4 again, which means Gamma, and that's like one of the harder hand traps to play through. If you're worried about like me not showcasing Nibiru, don't worry, that is to come later in the video. So we will showcase how to play around Nibiru as well. As well as like Ogre too. Ogre comes up later if I remember correctly. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and go for Dragite into Researcher. Now if your opponent does opt to negate your Researcher in your hand, that will suck. But if they do it on the field effect, you kind of are forced to use Ash here. I kind of misclicked there on my other account there, but like basically like you want to just try and hit a Guardian and just hope that you get lucky, and you know, sometimes you do. So I really do think that obviously it's a fragile hand to Gamma, but you have to just do whatever you can to make it work. So yeah, we hit the Guardian, and now we are kind of just safe to pop off if Gamma is their only hand trap. If they have Gamma and another hand trap, then that's a completely different story. But again, you know, for the purposes of this exercise, we are going to get into multiple hand traps later. So so stay tuned for that if you are not super convinced right now. But we're going to go ahead and trigger Fiber here. Unsurprisingly, that's going to get Plague Spider from deck and then just do the same stuff. So here I'm just going to play out the rest of my turn, because of course at any point if my opponent Gammas and that's their only hand trap, we could just use Guardian. And my opponent would be wise to possibly hold the Gamma for like maybe their own turn. If they can like bait something, it could just trade evenly. I mean, you could also just argue that like trading the Guardian is fine too, but we're just going to go and carry on with the Integrator line into Raptite. So we're going to go ahead and fire off the Raptite. Did we draw there? I actually didn't catch it. We drew Nibiru, yeah, so it's like fine. Again, like drawing hand traps is good. Like that's the one thing about Nibiru specifically, is that it's not the greatest hand trap to draw when you're going first and already comboing, since like if you're trying to build a board, it's not as great, but it still is okay to have just in case your board gets broken, or if you can't make the strongest board possible. You can see we hit the Analyzer off of the Raptite there, and now that's going to get us a copy of Supplier to our hand, or sorry, to our field, which gets Guardian to our hand. So that is pretty beneficial. We have filled up our hand quite nicely. Oh, and also something very minor, but could come up, is that Nibiru is a rock to reveal for Guardian, so that is something of note. Here we are going to go for the Gallon Granite. We could go for Savage as well. Oh yeah, no, I lied. We are going Savage. All right, I actually juked myself there. Yeah, we could have gone for Granite and then went for Seeker because we haven't used Seeker yet. But that's like not a guaranteed play, whereas this one is, and we have Plague to be able to make Verite Anaconda anyways. So we are totally fine with that. I am more than okay with stacking this Dark Magician to just get it not in my hand, so we can just send it to the graveyard instead with the Verite Anaconda. So yeah, still 4 interruptions on board, plus an additional 1 in hand to be able to set, and then possibly Nibiru if things go really, really south. So yeah, our follow-up's not amazing right now, but we do have Raptite in case that does live. And I do like to, ideally of course, keep both Raptite and Leonite on the field. But, you know, in cases like this where you weren't even able to access Leonite at all, you know, it's fine to just have this, because this still represents a decent amount of follow-up as well, in addition to the card you're drawing for turn. So that is going to be it for the examples against one hand trap. I'm going to reset and then look at the examples with multiple hand traps. Alright, so welcome back to more sample test hands versus hand traps, and this is going to be featuring multiple hand traps, specifically against 2 for the first 3 test hands, and then against 3 hand traps for the last one. So if you guys were maybe not convinced about the showcase against 1 hand trap, maybe saying that, oh, some of those hands were just like obviously naturally too good, or like in the example of that 3rd hand, like, oh, you can't even play through an Imperm. There are also cases where you can play through multiple hand traps, and of course times where you'll struggle as well. But it all just comes down to what hand traps your opponent has versus what you have and what you're trying to actively play through as well. Because there's a lot of things that you can maybe keep in mind, like with that DD Crow example last time. But we're just going to go ahead and kind of open the simulator, if you will. So our hand here is Double Supplier, Analyzer, Seeker, Imperm, which is a very good hand. Like, again, just drawing multiple of the tuners to be able to play through hand traps is good. Here we're going to have to contend with Imperm, Ash. So like that's a classic, you know, classic multiple hand trap combination, right? Ash Imperm, Ash Veiler, stuff like that. So we're gonna go ahead and start off like with the way we normally do. Your opponent could opt to, I guess, Imperm one of these, but like when they see both, it's gonna be hard. Like, and if they Ash one and Imperm the other, you just go Fiber and you do the full thing anyway. Plus they'll have a Supplier, so like your opponent is probably not inclined to stop either of this stuff, which again, it's like kind of risky because, you know, you could just hit a Guardian right here and then that's gonna really seal it up for, you know, the interruption against Ash in particular. But really, you know, when you open multiple tuners, you are just in such a good spot because it's pretty hard to play against if your opponent doesn't have like the right disruptions, namely Nibiru, of course. But even then, it can be hard because you get multiple chances at getting Guardian. Like you can see, we got Guardian again. So if we didn't get the first time, we're gonna get the second time. And like maybe if our opponent like Impermed one, we still have gotten the Guardian to our field. So it's just like really, really good overall when you see combinations like this. We draw another Imperm off the top, which is always appreciated. Like drawing into more hand traps, we will always take that. This is another example we can't really go into the Almirage, which always like I always want to try and go into Almirage whenever possible, just because feeling the Leonite, the Synchro Leonite, is always ideal. Just the way that I like to play the deck, and I think is the best way to play the way that this deck is built, at least. This deck, again, isn't playing a lot of extenders. It's not like playing, say, like Miracle Rupture on top of the Adhara and like Parallel Exceed. It's not really playing all those cards. Those are all cards I did consider, but not like together in the same strategy. We are here this time going to show what happens if you like potentially clog your board with like Supplier. And this also does play around the Ash as well. So like your opponent might not, it's probably not gonna like Imperm or Ash anyway because you have the level 2 tuner. And like if your opponent is like seasoned against this version of the deck, or like post ban list, they know that like all you're trying to do is get any level 2 tuner off Fiber. So if you already have it, it's not really, you know, there's not really much of a point. So here we're gonna go for Link Cross, and this is a time where your opponent could use the Imperm here, simply because, right, like deny access to tuner or non-tuner tokens means you can't get access to Marcher or like the resultant Herald, and which also cuts off access to like the body on top of the Herald as well, like the level 2 tuner that you bring back, or you could even bring back the Analyzer for level 4 tuner off the Marcher. So that's like a pretty good point to use the imperm there. But yeah, like in this kind of specific instance, your opponent kind of has to reserve their disruptions for a later point, I feel. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and I guess it take a while to think here. Use the Raptite, and like I guess I'm deciding like when I want to, from the perspective of the opponent here, use like the various disruptions, because like here we could use Ash, or we could get met with Ash, and then there's another chance where like we just save the Guardian. Like we don't have to use it because like if we get Nibiru, that would really suck. So just trying to lose to as few of that type of thing as possible, which of course does sort of reduce our ceiling here. Like we could have ended on a much bigger board potentially if like this Raptite maybe hit like a Researcher. We could have hit something else and then like used the Plague Spreader as well, which I believe, yeah, that was just summoned off of the Fiber, so we didn't bring it back with its own effect. But still, we have 5 interruptions through 2 hand traps that like were very hard to use optimally just because of the way that we opened. So it's always really nice to see you open well, and if your opponent doesn't have the right hand traps, then that is going to bode well for you. So let's go into the next example here. This is going to be again versus 2 hand traps, and we are going to open this time Red Ice Fusion, Supplier, Doki, Ash, and Seeker. So here we land on 3/6, which is Nibiru Crow. So this is a very interesting combination of cards because they interact with very different parts of the combo. Where like you drop Nibiru obviously like as late as you safely can, and you can't really use Crow until like a specific point in the combo. There's like only one really crucial point where DD Crow actually matters in a lot of cases. Like maybe you could hit assigns, but that's generally not going to be as impactful as say a just hitting like the Marcher target, right? So we're gonna go for Doki here, and then hit a copy of, or get the Supplier out of our hand to go ahead and fire off this Analyzer. Like we could have just normal summoned the Seeker as well, but like this gets a little bit of resiliency, because if we're getting hand trapped at the early stage, like if their opponent had like Gamma or Veiler or Imperm Ash at any point, like it wouldn't really matter if we went for Doki versus going for Seeker first, because we were kind of going to be in a tough spot regardless. Like we had the Supplier to like maybe recover as a body, but we didn't open Research, we had Seeker. So you see we got the Guardian off of the Analyzer again, which is going to help out quite nicely. And this is like one of the points where we can actually go for the Almirage, which is very good to see. Because Almirage is a card you could theoretically cut, just because like it's not a card that actually does anything besides just be a Fire Engrave. And I wish there were better Fire Synchros. There really just are not good Fire Synchros, unfortunately. And I guess you could play like Phoenix, but you're not really gonna throw away Phoenix, because like at that point you might as well just throw away the Almirage. So it's like not really a good in-engine way. Like you could play Red Resonator, which is something that people are testing with, but I just think that that card is it's just not that needed personally. So we're just gonna go for the Martial Meta Marcher. I just prefer the Plague Spreader more, just because like it can act as like a double extender. So here our Marcher hits the Plague, which is especially bad here, because we're gonna assume that our opponent isn't like if we don't assume our opponent's on Crow, like, this ends up being pretty bad, because like if we negate this with Guardian, we just get smacked by Nibiru and we lose. Or, well, actually, we wouldn't necessarily lose. Like our opponent would have to Nibiru, and then we could actually stack the Red Ice Fusion with the Plague Spider, and then go for the Link Spider that I do play with the Nibiru token, and then go for Verity Anaconda, which is fair enough. But here we're in a position now that like we can still combo because we still have the Guardian to negate the Nibiru. But at this point, our Red Ice Fusion is stranded in our hand, and we don't have our stacking mechanism to kind of help mitigate that. So we're forced to just try and use our backup plan, which is going to be Seeker, and that hits a Leonite, which is going to be decent. We can go for Herald Raptite here as well, which is nice. Like you can see this comes up quite often. So we're able to just kind of see what we can get off the top here, and just try and find something impactful. The thing is that we're going to have to link away this Guardian if we don't find a rock to our hand soon, because we just don't have any to reveal. So it's going to be probably going to be linked away for the Verite if we don't find anything like super conducive to extending. We had a Dragite, and then we draw, I believe that was a Guardian off the top. So that's actually nice. We can actually now just link away the Dragite instead and keep that negation on the field. But, I mean, going into Verticana Ikana again just doesn't do anything when we have Red Ice Fusion just in our hand, right? So that's a little bit unfortunate there. What we could do is go for Researcher by overlaying the Guardian and the Dragite here, which is something to think about. But overall, it's probably better to just kind of leave the board as is, because that way you're not like forced to waste like overlay one of your disruptions and then waste the other for Nibiru, and then like Researcher might not hit, so that could end up being very, very bad. So the one time that Crow actually matters here is of course when we need Plague to stack the Red Ice Fusion, and that's like a very low chance of like that situation happening specifically together, but it can happen, and I want to showcase that again. Like these test hands, were not really picked in any sort of way. They just kind of happened because again I just kind of set up and then rolled the dice, and that's what we got. So moving into the next example here, this is going to be the final example versus 2 hand traps. So we're going to be looking at a hand of Seeker, Imperm, Supplier, Doki, and Researcher. So this hand, again, like when you have multiple tuners, you're just sitting pretty. So yeah, we're going to see Ogre plus... oh yeah, this is one of the hands where I was going to initially just do versus 1 hand trap. And I'm like, no, this is way too easy because we could just go like, Supplier, or pitch Supplier off Doki and then get Guardian, and that like just completely negates the Ogre. And then again, like I could have done the similar thing. I think this is like the first test hand I did, like with hand traps with the simulation. So I didn't really know what I was doing yet. So I think here I was still operating under the assumption that I would use the Guardian to just immediately negate whatever hand trap, instead of what I did versus the first couple of test hands you saw there, where if I had Guardian in the field and like I could play just straight up through the point disruption hand traps, then I would just save it in case they had Nibiru, right? So that's something I could have done here, but we could have just like assumed straight up that opponent has Nibiru as well, which is what we end up doing here. So now we have to play through Ogre and Nibiru. So here's a point where opponent maybe could have Ogred, but like it's not a great point to do so, just because like the best chance to Ogre if you can is on the what's it called, Fiber, because that cuts off lead cross access, and like that's primarily what we need access to when we're trying to manage all these tuners, because like it's easy to get tuners but harder to get non-tuners until later on, unless like you get lucky with your excavates, of course. But here we go Doki to pitch Supplier, which you could argue if we're trying to specifically play around Ogre, you want to keep Supplier in hand to play around it on Fiber. And our Excavate misses here. So that's definitely something to like really think about, is like maybe you could structure this a little bit differently. Like I could have gone for the Researcher effect first before firing off the Doki, and then like could gone for the Seeker as well. Because if we were lucky enough to hit a Guardian, then we would have been able to actually just keep the Supplier in hand straight up. Here I forget to put Almirage on the grave, and I think I actually point that out later. But yeah, we're going to go for Fiber, which gets stopped by the Ogre. And again, this is like a case where if you're able to play through a hand trap, you probably should try and at least do so. Of course, that kind of puts us on, better hit something good off of this Seeker, which is not always the safest line of play, but definitely could be relevant if you were trying to, again, just play through Nibiru or like prepare for the worst, right? So a Dragite gets another copy of Impermanent Hand, which is not an extender, but like it's fine just having more defense. And then yeah, this point is where we reveal the Almirage. I'm like, yeah, I should have made that. There's actually one point I believe in a later combo where I just straight up put the Almirage in grave, because I'm like, I should not be forgetting to do this, because it's really important if you hit level 4 here and want to go for Risen Leonite, because like if that happens, then you really would like to have that as just a tool at your disposal. But here we grab the Analyzer off of the Risen Rap type, which is very, very nice for us because we have not used that miner yet. So between that and the Plague Spreader, we should be in a decent spot. We whiff again, which we haven't been whiffing that often because we built our deck to try to have as many non-tuner rocks as we could conceivably fit. And this is sometimes the difference between that 13th non-tuner rock name. It's hard to like kind of pinpoint those, of course, because you can't distinctively say, that you would have gotten it otherwise. But that is something to kind of just think about. Here we actually are going to go for the Savage, because since we took the Analyzer, we had 2 tuners, so we couldn't unfortunately go for the Risen Leonite, which obviously I would have much preferred because I just like that card a lot more. But we are also just going to link away the Guardian because we don't have any rocks in hand either. So we are able to make the Savage first to play around Nibiru still, because we can just negate the Nibiru at any point before getting rid of our Guardian on the board. And this ends up being a pretty weak board. If we weren't greedy with the Analyzer, we could have gone for a lot of other plays. Like we could have gone for the the Risen Leonite, and that could have gotten a rock to hand, so we could have maybe kept the Guardian on the board. Plus we had the Plague still. But as we played it, it probably wasn't the ideal way to do it. I really thought the Analyzer would hit, so we could have our cake and eat it too. But if you miss, then that does suck. To be fair, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 non-tuner rocks out of our deck anyway, so we were down to 8. So that does diminish the chances by a non-zero amount. But regardless, we still have 3 disruptions here. It's not amazing, but we were able to still play around Nibiru and try and hopefully work around our opponent's other 4 cards. So for the final example, we are going to be looking at 3 hand traps, which is gonna be very hard for this deck to do without Block Dragon, obviously. But this, if any hand can do it, it's one with this kind of setup where you have multiple tuners and you have Doki. So we are going to go ahead and roll a couple of dice here. So we roll a 3, and then we roll a 4, so that's Nibiru, Gamma, which is already a strong combo, and Crow. So Nib, Gamma, Crow is very, very strong. So we're going to have to kind of just contend against that and see how far we can get. So we're going to, of course, start off with Doki, and like I mentioned earlier in a previous combo, or previous test hand, you just definitely want to summon a Researcher when you can. Just because it makes it so that your opponent has a harder time actually identifying the best places to stop. Now here is a point of contention where if you want a Seeker or not Seeker. Because if you get Gamma'd, depends on when you get Gamma'd. If you get Gamma'd by the hand effect of a Researcher, which is probably the best point for your opponent to do it, then you follow up with Doki. If you get Gamma'd on the Researcher field effect, though, you want to have Seeker on board first. Or I guess you could pitch it off Doki as well. I guess it doesn't really matter too much at that point. But I guess the lose is harder to Veiler, right? Or Ash. So you probably just want to have the body there if you're planning to do it that way. But if you're facing down plan B, you could kind of do it like this too. Now, something that I didn't really think about as I was playing, doing the simulation, but something that you should definitely bear in mind right now is your opponent could just honestly save the Gamma Nib, of course, and hold it for if you have Guardian, and then just hit your entire field. So that's probably a much more opportune way to use it. So we can kind of go over that as well. It's something that I didn't obviously consider as I was sort of playing out this hand. But you saw the Seeker, grab a copy of Dragite. So anything about though is that obviously we would have had the Researcher excavate too. So that would have changed the board entirely. So it's kind of hard to say what would have distinctly happened if this Gamma wasn't here and our opponent just saves it for comboing Gamma Nib together. Because obviously we have just a much larger setup at this stage in the sequence. But we get the Fiber as well as the Plague and Supplier, which we drew, I believe, off the Dragite there, which was pretty nice to have as just an additional body. Able to go Link Cross next, and our opponent is able to Nibiru us here for sure, which is probably the most advisable thing to do, because you can theoretically just go straight up into Herald, and that ends up being pretty unfortunate. Now, the thing with the Supplier here is that if you really want to be conservative, right, you didn't have to summon the Supplier there unless you wanted to chain block Fiber, which there's an argument to be made to do that or to not do that. So you could have the mentality of, okay, it's fine because you can just use Play to stack, but then you get hit with the DD Crow. So if you do it in that sequence, then your turn definitely stops. But if you saved the Supplier, then you could just summon that when you, after you get Nibiru'd. And then you could just go ahead and turn the token into Link Spider, and then use that plus the resultant Supplier and go into Verte and summon out Dragoon that way, as I'll show here. So again, there's a lot of different ways your opponents can structure multiple different combinations of hand traps, especially something like Nib Gamma. Because again, if your opponent just waited to combo those together to try and just break the entire board versus a single Guardian, then yeah, you can definitely run into resistance there. But the entire turn would just play out completely differently, so it's very hard to definitively say, what would have been the better choice. So again, that's why it's kind of hard to run these simulations just by myself, which I just try and do these as much as I can so I can schedule these on my own time. But yeah, it's like hard to play as if you don't know how your opponent is playing, because your opponent can do very different things based on what they see fit. So that's why, again, it's hard to kind of just say a one-size vacuum fits all for this type of thing. But you can see at the very least that the deck still has the ability to somewhat push through these hand traps. It is hard, of course, to play through 3. But again, you have your own hand traps to kind of back that up. And honestly, at that point, you just got to hope your opponent didn't draw enough engine cards to actually play the game themselves. So that is something to definitely consider when you are playing in real time. But we are now going to go ahead and move on into the board breaker section of the video in just a bit. Okay, so this is going to be part 3 of the video, where we discuss how we can play versus various board breakers. Now, I will say that we're going to follow a similar process to the hand traps that you guys just saw, but it gets a little bit redundant at times because a lot of the board breakers are functionally very similar, and none of them, of course, preclude you from actually just doing your full combo. So you'll kind of see what I mean when we kind of get into it here. Which is why there's going to be a separate section after this where we combine hand traps and board breakers together and actually look at the most powerful high impact ones. So you can just see like sort of worst case scenario type of situations, right? But you can see the numbers I assigned this time. We're going to be 1 for kaijus, 2 for sphere mode, which is not really popular at all, but I just figured in a vacuum it's nice to have this here because it literally just clears 3 of our disruptions. 3 is going to be Dark Ruler, 4 is going to be Droplet, 5 is going to be Super Poly, which is specifically targeted at the Dragoon package, which I suppose is like relatively weak, and a lot of people not a lot of people are really on Super Poly at the moment, but it's still something to maybe be mindful of. And then 6 is going to be Mystic Mine, everyone's favorite. So our opening hand here is Researcher, Seeker, Dragite, Red Eyes, and Imperm. So again, multiple tuners, so you always like to see it, which is why I'm a big advocate of just playing 40 if you have the ability to. You definitely want to just see these as much as you can. So we're gonna hit Droplet here, and like this is what I mean by you can just play essentially unhindered. Now of course you are still going to be wary of hand traps in pretty much all situations if you can afford to, but just keeping in mind that if you only have to deal with board breakers, you're gonna basically just be able to play your full hand and just kind of harken back to the beginning of the video where we just assumed no disruption. But this time we're going to have our opponent have ways to at least break the board to some capacity. It kind of sucked here actually. I remember thinking this as I was like kind of playing through it, was that the one time I get to show off, what happens if you can keep Researcher in the face of Nibiru. Like this is a very, very good thing here. But unfortunately, there is no Nibiru in this particular simulation. But if you get like a 4 to keep the Researcher in hand and just save it for when you have the Nib token, and then like just special it because you control a rock and then keep going from there, like that is a very, very good recovery sort of backup play. But here we're just gonna go for the standard Martial Meta Marcher into Cyber's Integrator stuff. We got Plague there, and we draw a copy of Nibiru, which is always appreciated, of course. It is a rock after all. So we're going to hit our Raptite, which gets the Researcher anyway, so we don't even have to use the one in our hand, which is definitely fine. We can still special summon it if we just want the body, and that could definitely come up as well. But for the time being, we're just going to go ahead and fire off this Researcher and see what we can get. And what do you know, we hit a Dragite, which is pretty good here. We could get a second Guardian if we wanted to, but I really just wanted the extra draw and just see what we can work with. Potentially drawing a Signs is nice. Yeah, this is what I mentioned earlier, is like one of these examples I'm just going to put the Almirage in grave because I really need to get into the habit of that, and you guys should too. But this is the one thing that I just consistently forget about, is like, if you normal summon Doki or like one of the crystals, you should just be going for Almirage. Or even if you normal summon Researcher, you should just be going Almirage. I think we picked up another copy of Imperm off the draw for the Dragite there, and we just went into the Leonite afterward. Because it's always the point where I'm going to summon Leonite, I'm like, wait, I really just need a way to enable that. So yeah, definitely don't be negligent like me. But we do hit a Signs here, which is very good. Unfortunately, we aren't able to do this in such a way that wait, what did I stack off the Plague here? Actually, I missed it. Did I actually forget? No, we stacked the Red Ice Black Dragon. Okay, we had actually so many cards in hand that I thought that we didn't stack anything. Okay, But yeah, we're going to go ahead and just go for Verite Anaconda. What we could do is like we can Signs perhaps to get another extender, but we already used all of our tuners that we have like right now in the graveyard. So it doesn't really actually accomplish that much. So I just figured hold on to the resources and we can just have the Researcher in hand as follow-up, and we have the Signs for follow-up. And we have still 6 interruptions plus a Nibiru. So we can just go ahead and pass here. And our opponent, it's really hard to evaluate Droplet too, because like obviously your opponent's not going to do this where they just throw away 4 cards and negate the entire board, because at that point they only have 1 card in hand. I know there's like 2 in hand right now, but if you count there's 7, because I had all 6 of the options up here in our opponent's hand to start. But like if your opponent does this, then they're working with 1 card unless if the entire graveyard has setup, which is why like it really depends on the deck your opponent is playing and like how they use a Droplet, because of course Droplet can send on field, so they can like beta negation with like a search card, maybe like a Fossil Dig for example, and then like send it in response so they get like the value off that. So Droplet's hard to evaluate, but what we can say is that even if our opponent uses the Droplet profitably and has like ways to actually maybe take use of the graveyard effects as well, or make use of the graveyard effects, we still have 2 hand traps and a Nibiru, so we're very likely able to still stop them to some capacity, and we are able to have the good follow-up as well. So we're most likely not going to be dying. Like we could be, but it's pretty low chance. And again, it's hard to talk about Droplet without mentioning the cards that are adjacent to it, right? So I mean, it's again tough to evaluate, which is why I did fewer of these combos to begin with, and I quickly realized, this is not as useful of an exercise as just playing through hand traps, but it still is something that's worth doing in my opinion. We can move on to the next one here, which is going to be again versus 1 board breaker, or go second card. We're going to do 2 more of these and then 1 with 2 board breakers combined. Just because I realize again that there's not really a lot of value to be had in this exercise, at least to the extent that the hand trap exercise did. And you can see I forgot to roll the die, and I'll be doing that later on. But luckily, we don't have to play around like anything specific. Because again, we're assuming no hand traps and only a board breaker, so we can just play accordingly. You saw our hand was actually not that good. It was literally just Seeker, and we had to hope that it hit. And we did hit Guardian, which ended up not being that useful, but we are able to at least go for Supplier and Fiber. I think I accidentally triggered the Supplier late by mistake, but yeah, it definitely should be activating it, of course. We're going to go for the Link Cross for the... we could do the Herald line here as well, Herald into Raptite. So we do just that. And because we have Signs here, it was Fiber plus Signs, right? So we have the Broken combo where you can summon the other unused level 2 Adamancipator tuner. And he was like, oh, I just totally forgot to roll the dice. So we're going to be playing against Mystic Mime, which is very easy if that's the only card. And it's never going to be the only card, right? But like, if it is, then you have Dragoon and sometimes Herald, sometimes Savage. So you have ways to kind of mitigate that. If they draw combinations of these, that's when it gets tricky, which we'll get into later on in the video. But again, that's why I'm like, oh, just 1 board breaker doesn't really tell us a whole lot. Because like, the only one that I guess would matter, or like the ones would matter would be like Sphere Mode and Dark Ruler, which just instantly answer the board so they can use the rest of their hand to kind of play. But again, it just kind of depends on how good their hand is, right? So it's like never necessarily just like, I mean, it can be an auto win, but of course the hand has to be good enough to actually make use of it. But you saw that I went for the same sort of just summon Researcher off the Signs, stack the Crystal Leonite, excavate it, stack the Signs, go for Leonite, grab Signs back. It's a very, very good sort of loop. And I think you can abuse this very well if you just play the 1 single copy of Leonite in both the extra deck and the main deck. It really goes a long way. I do think it's definitely worth it. So we can just go ahead and go for Analyzer, which we did not use as well here either. And again, if you did have to use the Analyzer to get into Fiber to begin with, like say this Seeker was the Analyzer and we like did the whole play regardless, like you still are fine here. Like you can just go for, Savage if you want to, or like you can make Verite here and then just bank on hitting a level 4. And if you don't, you just have this here for next turn anyways, so not a big deal. And that is actually what I end up doing here, because you can just go ahead and oh sorry, I was talking about like if you didn't use the analyzer. But if you did use the analyzer, like you just can go ahead and have this body there if you need to, or if you want to just keep it as a follow-up tool. Got a little bit off track there, but we're gonna go ahead and draw off of the Dragite. And I don't remember what we picked up. I'm very bad at like keeping track of that. Alright, we drew the Imperm. So again, it's very good to have hand traps to draw into off of these types of cards. And again, like if we're playing around board breakers, might as well just play around Lightning Storm. So there's that. And then we can just go ahead and summon out our Dragoon here. So we do have a Quackmire Guardian in hand, or in grave rather, and we're going to be able to tribute the Herald of the Arclight, so we can just swap those out. So we still have 5 onboard interruptions and an Imperm to back it up. So, you know, all very good stuff. Versus like a Dark Ruler, this would be pretty devastating, but if it's just a mine, you know, we have like a billion ways to kind of deal with it. So that's again why like this is not the best exercise, but you can see your opponent would need to have like multiple cards to go second, which is again why I'm just generally an advocate of hand traps in a lot of cases, unless if your deck can really make use out of like these types of cards, like if it's kind of built to facilitate that. But we're going to move into the third example now, and this is going to be the last instance of just a singular board breaker. Or I suppose they're not all board breakers, like Mystic Mine isn't a board breaker, but just go second cards. You guys know what I'm referring to when I mean board breaker. But yeah, our hand here this time is pretty weak, but it is Fiber plus Signs. So it is basically full combo if it resolves, and you can see that we're playing against board breakers, so if it's not hand traps, we are still actually able to completely go and build our full Adamancipator board, which would be you know, Raptite Witches live plus Leonite plus Savage and the Dragoon. So like that's what you can achieve even with this hand if your opponent doesn't have hand traps. And here you can see this is the only time where at least the only time that I remember that I actually change what I roll here, because I just did Mystic Mine. So I'm like, I really don't want to do it again, because we already demonstrated that one single Mystic Mine by itself isn't going to be enough, and it's heavily reliant on what other cards your opponent has to force it out. So like that's not really a useful exercise, so I wanted to do something different. And I landed on one for which is Kaiju, and I'm like, let's just do Sphere Mode instead, because I already know this hand is full combo. So like you definitely, you know, one Kaiju isn't going to be enough by itself. So we're going to go ahead, Special at Hara, and then normal summon Ash, because we kind of have to here. The good thing about that is at least it puts the fire in grave, although we were going to do that anyway if we were using Ash at any point. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do to get to Fiber. So you're going to go ahead and summon out the Seeker. But again, like from this point, even though it was a rough opener, or like rough way to start the combo, it functionally ends in the same way. Like this could have been like a Supplier or like a Dragite or just something that wasn't high impact. And then you just do the same stuff. It's very, very nice. So yeah, we were able to just go ahead and go for a regular Cybers Integrator stuff. And then we're going to pick up a copy of the Analyzer, which is pretty nice here. We're also then able to use these signs, which can bring back the copy of Seeker. And then we're going to just do the same stuff. I'm just going to hit next play a bunch, because you guys have already seen this if you've gone through the video, and I'd recommend watching earlier portions of the video if you are lost on why this sequencing is super efficient. But again, the reason why it's so good is that like normally your signs does get you this value, like you're able to stack and get like basically 2 monsters for the price of 1, but this lets you go into Leonite, which is a disruption, and it gets you another 2 monsters because you haven't used Raptite yet, because like you're now guaranteed to hit off Raptite. And like it just turns your board into something that's actually a lot better too, because it just conveniently lines up that you get the fire engrave, you get the wind engrave. Like it's so cool to me that you get all these attributes that work like extremely well. It's awesome. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and use the Analyzer as well, and that's gonna get the Supplier to the board. We really were just looking for anything. If we missed, we could just use the signs, even though it wasn't ideal, but we didn't miss because we play a lot of non-tuner rocks. So, and literally the only one that we went through was Leonite as well. So like we were just super very, very likely to hit. Yeah, we're just super likely to hit off of the Analyzer there. We can go for Savage, and then we can go for Verite. Like this is all virtually guaranteed off of the off of just Fiber plus Signs. The only point of contention or point of randomness is the Analyzer Excavate. But like if you have so many of these non-tuner rocks, you're gonna be able to hit them all. Now, here's where we can get smacked by Sphere Mode. They're probably gonna get rid of the 3 disruptions that are gonna be live on our board. So they could also hit the Leonite if they want to prevent us from summoning back We don't have a Guardian in this particular case, but like they could hit it if they want to, stop us from summoning it. We could also like use this to summon the Rap type back, which could get the DD Crow back anyways. And we could actually go Chainlink 1 Leonite. I believe I say this in the chat. We can go Chainlink 1 Leonite and then Chainlink 2 Nibiru. So when that resolves, we can keep the Rap type on the board. So we can have it for next turn, which is also a very, very good thing. So this is like, again, even though we got, a lot of our board ripped apart, if we had a better hand, first off, like this would have been better. Like it could have been better. We could have had like a Guardian or a Herald on top of it. But we also have hand traps again to just kind of back ourselves up, which is very, very good. And we have so many threats that, we're going to have at least some value prevailing on our board, even if it's not directly through interruption. So like say we had a Guardian in here, then like our opponent would have to choose basically between the Guardian setup plus the Rap type DD Crow. And depending on what deck they're playing, that it could be, bad to keep either of them either way. So that is a very strong case for, just playing the Leonite package. Like, I hope if nothing else, people will test out the Leonite package because I really think it's good. But we're gonna move on to the final board breaker example, and this will be a little bit different. So we're gonna actually, okay, so this is gonna be different because like if you have two board breakers that do the same thing, like Sphere Mode and Dark Ruler, then there's not really a point in doing that because you just use the Sphere Mode and then you just move on. Like you use Sphere Mode and then Dark Ruler, I guess, if you have like four or five monster negates. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. So what I did instead was I went for the first roll being odds is mine and evens is Super Poly. So we did that, and then we're going to pair it with another board breaker. Because Super Poly is a weaker board breaker than the other ones. So we're just going to go ahead and pair that with one of the other four. Actually, they're the previous six, I'm sorry. I've actually lagged here, that's why I typed droplet twice. But yeah, we landed on 3 and 2, so that means odds is Mystic Mine and then 2 is Sphere Mode. So that's actually a good exercise because that means you can go Sphere Mode and then Mystic Mine, and that actually does something. Whereas Mystic Mine by itself doesn't really do anything, and Sphere Mode by itself does something depending on what your rest of your hand is, and it's like hard to evaluate. So that's why I kind of like doing it this way, because I figure this is the best chance to actually have a combination of board breakers that actually works together instead of just accomplishing the same thing. It's the same thing as like drawing 2 Ash, right? Like, what's the point of testing against 2 Ash if they can only use 1 anyways? That's kind of the mindset. All right, so anyways, with that rambling aside, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. It really is just Researcher, which again, you don't like to see just one play, and if you look at that, we actually whiffed. So that is a pretty bad series of events, but this actually isn't a pass. Because we do play Almirage, we can actually go into it, and then we can signs back the Researcher. And even though we would have preferred to keep this for, Fiber plus signs, at the very least you don't have to sit through that line of play again, and you could see something a little bit funnier instead. But this is at the very least, just Fiber, which isn't great, but it gets you to most of where you need to be. And we still have 2 hand traps to back it up. So we're just going to go through the same stuff as we have been going through this entire time. We draw an Adhara, which is one of the downsides of this card. It's like not really that useful. But then again, you could argue like Draga and, extra Guardians aren't that great to draw in hand either. So it's like totally okay. We're going to go ahead and pick up a Seeker off of this Rap set here. And then we can use Seeker's effect. And we can get a copy. Actually, we could opt to get nothing here. If we want to like play specifically around Sphere Mode. Yeah, this is like I think what I was gonna try and demonstrate here. So if you want to play specifically around Sphere Mode, you could just end on a board like this, and then you use Verite Anaconda to change the Raptite attribute, and then use Dragoon to negate your own Verite Anaconda. It does waste a card out of your hand, but you do play around both Sphere Mode and Super Poly this way, and then you can like negate the Mystic Mine here. So that's how you can like nullify the Sphere Mode if you like open up not very well at all. The other way is of course to just have so many negations, but I mean you'll never have unfortunately enough like negations to be able to stop Mystic Mine if you have like 5 monsters, because like you'll most likely be having just like Raptite for example, which doesn't interact with mine at all. So like they would just tribute like say your Dragoon, Savage, Herald, and then you just get mined out of the game, which can definitely suck. But if you again want to play like a main deck out to Mystic Mine, that's not a bad idea either. But that's like some ideas on how you can, get out of this. I revealed the kaiju there just because like if they drew a kaiju as well on top of this and just kaiju the dragoon and the mystic mind you, then that definitely sucks. And kaijus are definitely more popular right now, so I wouldn't recommend playing around sphere mode, like specifically. As the same with super poly to be clear. But those are just some ideas for like potential future formats if those cards ever come back into the fray again. So we're done now with part 3, and part 4 is going to be the last part where we actually combine both of the board breakers and the hand traps together. So see you in just a bit. Okay, so this is going to be the final part of the video where we go ahead and just apply everything that we used before and just try and play around various combinations of hand traps and board breakers, which is also super possible. So we're going to go ahead and just get started here. So what I did was I just took the highest impact cards I felt from each category and assigned them new numbers. And then I would roll the dice twice, and ideally we would want to hit one of each, but it's not a big deal if not, because again, these are all just very powerful cards. So you can see 1 is Nibiru, 2 Gamma, 3 Ogre, which is very good against Fiber, which is why I consider it high impact, 4 Sphere Mode, 5 Dark Ruler, and 6 Mystic Mime. So we hit Ruler and Mystic Mime, which is pretty similar to Sphere Mode Mystic Mime, but instead it doesn't really matter how many monsters we end on. So we're just going to go ahead and see this through. So our hand is decent enough. We just kind of have like a lot of clunky monsters that will kind of like be fragments of our board. So it's not ideal, but it's alright. We have the Guardian to play around hand traps, but you know, we didn't roll any hand traps. But we're going to, of course, play assuming the opponent does have them. So we link away actually both of our tuners here, just so we can keep the level 4 non-tuner body naturally. We could also have summoned Supplier in this case, because like I mentioned before, you can just go Raptite, and then you can go for Link Cross and like bring back Plague and stuff, or you can like overlay for Gallant in that case. So yeah, we can go for Marcher, and then bring back Seeker, and then go for Herald, Raptite, same stuff, and then we can use Raptite's effect. They hit a copy of Crystal Leonite. So yeah, like it's like there's not really a whole lot to explain when we don't have to play around hand traps anymore, because I pretty much got everything I wanted to say in the like previous 15 combos we already did. So not really any point. It's just kind of redundant at this point. But you can see, you know, we still end on like very consistently strong boards. Even though that hand wasn't amazing, it was still fine enough. Like we only used 1 minor that entire turn, and we didn't have access to signs at all. Plus, like when you go for Herald, you do lose out on the chance to maybe draw into signs off of, like the integrator, but this is still like good enough. You know, it's still 5 interruptions. Now our opponent will be able to Dark Ruler Mystic Mine us out of the game, and that is one of the downfalls of this deck. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna put it mildly. If you don't have an out, you are going to lose this card if this happens. But it is very likely on the plus side that if you're in a situation where your opponent is playing these cards, it's probably games 2 and 3. So if you like see Mystic Mine or anticipating it, you could definitely, you know, prepare outs for it. But yeah, just know that like even though you can produce very strong boards, you will fold to this specific combination of cards, and there's not really a whole lot you can say or do about it, unfortunately. So next we are going to go ahead and move into the next example. So this is going to be using the same subset of cards as we did before. And you can see our hand is very good. We have both of the tuners, or 2 tuners rather, and a signs. So it's like Fiber plus the signs combo, but critically we drew the Leonite. So we're going to have to structure this a little bit differently so we can still make use out of the Leonite, as you're about to see. But this time we're going to roll a 6, which is a Mystic Mine. And I know we've been using the Mine a lot, but it is a critical weakness of this deck, so it's fine that we're actually like running into it quite a bit. And then also 1, which is the Nibiru. So these 2 cards actually can work fairly well depending on when you're Nibiru, or when you get Nibiru'd, because your opponent could actually just summon the token and attack, crash into it, and just go Mystic Mine. So even though it kind of seems like a weird combo, it definitely can still work. So we're going to go ahead and start with our tuners, and then go for an Analyzer, which hits a Guardian right off the bat. So we already don't have to worry about Nibiru for this turn. So I'm just going to play out the rest of the hand as I normally would. Now we're going to go for Seeker next, and this fires off a copy of Doki Doki. And since we only have 1 Leonite, you know, we don't really actually get any value off of this, so we can just feel free to link it off away. Just because this way we can like play around Ash and stuff like that. Ash Impair on this is like fine. we can go for Plague instead of Researcher because again we already drew the Leonite, so we can go for a different route here. So we are going to go ahead and go for a copy of Marshalman and Marcher. We could have actually done the Researcher now that I'm thinking about it, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we're going to go ahead and Researcher back the Plague, and then go for the Integrator line, and then go for the Wrap type. And we're going to draw a copy of Dragite here. So what we do is, I think about when I'm going to use Plague versus when I'm going to use Signs. And ultimately, it actually doesn't matter that much, because it doesn't matter if you stack with the Signs here. I thought that might have come up, but it actually wasn't going to, because you're going to hit it off the Wrap type anyway. So the way this restructures your sequence is you have to use Wrap type first. So if you want to use the Leonite, unfortunately you can't summon Researcher because you're going to have to stack the Leonite. But like you could have used Researcher, like I was mentioning just now, because like it gets you access to be able to stack like a Dragite, so you can still get access to like a Leonite played that way. It's just you're not guaranteed to hit Signs. But this way, you actually are guaranteed to hit Signs if you use the Plague Spreader route, because you're able to stack it and then go for a Leonite here. Now we're going to have to use Signs regardless. So it didn't matter if we used Plague first or Signs first. If we just used Signs, we just didn't stack there. We would have to have linked away our board for Verite, but regardless, the result's the same. We get to use Signs again, and we get to go ahead and revive back another body to be able to use with this Plague if we want to. It's a little bit tricky, but we could also just synchro away one of our synchros here. Getting rid of the Leonite, summon Savage, and then we can bring back the Leonite itself. So in effect, we are able to successfully play around Nibiru. We have a rock in hand, and we have 5 interruptions rather. Misclicked there. But yeah, we have 5 interruptions plus an imperm as well. So we are in a very good spot. Like we can negate the Nibiru, and then we can just move on. We can negate the Mystic Mine as well, and that is how you can successfully play around 2 of the strongest sort of interruptions, or like ways to handle combo decks in the game. Alrighty guys, so this is going to be the last example of the video, the final frontier. Can this deck play through 3 very powerful interruptions / board breakers? And this is a separate take because I realized midway through recording the last one that my prior example for this specific sort of experiment against 3 disruptions / like board wipes or board clearers or what have you was actually invalid because I messed up what I did. So I rolled a Nibiru and accidentally used Gamma instead. So I was like, I should probably just redo it. So that literally just went out. I stopped recording and I hopped into another session with both my accounts, and I am doing this again. So this time we are going to be facing off against, it was, I believe, Gamma, Ogre, and Mystic Mine. And I know like I rolled Mystic Mine a lot, but you know, the die does what the die does. So that is what we're going to have to contend with. We're not going to be using, obviously, Ghost Ogre twice because it's hard once per turn. And we're not using it 3 times. So we are going to contend with the, of course, Gamma Ogre and Mystic Mine here. So this is going to be quite difficult, but it is manageable with a hand that is decent. This hand is not amazing. Drawing these crystals aren't great, but we have enough extension that it's good enough. So we're going to start off, of course, by specialing at Hara. And then normaling the Doki. Now the Doki doesn't have anything good to summon right now, so we're going to have to be forced to use a Researcher. And I simulate that we're going to be facing off against Gamma, because they have Ogre, so they can like Ogre the Fiber, and that's like good enough. So what they see is that, you know, Gamma Researcher to prevent Guardian from paying the board, and then Ogre the Fiber, and that's game over. So that's like, from the vantage point of the opponent, that's what it should be, right? So we're going to go ahead and have that be negated. Then we're actually going to use the Doki because we play 2 of the Dragite instead of just 1. So we're going to actually summon that to our field. And then we can actually insulate ourselves a little bit. So we can go for the Almirage and then go for a copy of Fiber, which is still going to get Ghost Ogred. But at the very least, we have this level 4 non-tuner on board still. So we can go into Raptite. Even though we can't get Link Cross access, which sucks, we are still able to go into Raptite, which is very good. Now we can go ahead and fire it off. Go for a copy of Supplier here that we hit. And now we have to be a little bit creative in what we try and navigate from here, because we have a couple of options. Obviously, we're going to add a copy of Guardian to hand off of this effect. But what we can do is we can go for a Synchro 8, because we can Plague and then go for like Savage. Or we can go for Dragoon, which would work fine. Or we can go for something a little bit more high rolly, which is what I'm going to be doing because you guys know that I love Leonite. So we're going to stack Crystal Leonite, and then we're going to go for Synchro Leonite. So the worst case scenario is that we miss an extender. Like any hit of Signs or Seeker would be good here. So obviously it's not like the best chance, but we have 6 chances to hit in 32 each time. So we have a pretty high probability of doing so. So we're going to go for it. And if not, we can just go for Verite Anaconda worst case scenario. And that is going to be it. But we do luckily manage to hit a copy of Seeker. Again, it wasn't unlikely because 6 and 32. And each, we have each chance to hit, like with each Excavate, increases the chances. So we're going to go ahead and go for a Seeker, and that's going to get ourselves possibly another card. We do manage to hit another copy of the Supplier. We already used the Doki, so not really any point in using it this turn, even though we already used Supplier as well. But we're able to go for a Verite Anaconda with the Wrap type because we don't have a Wind Engrave right now, so not really any point in keeping it on board in terms of just disruption. Plus, this can also bring back the Wrap type if we need to during our opponent's turn. So we can then go for our Dragoon here, which is going to answer the Mystic Mine, which is very good. But also, what we can do is once we use it to negate, we answered all 3 of the cards, so we answered Ogre, Mine, and Gamma. And we can use the Leonite to bring back the Guardian that we pitched for cost. If we don't need to, like I mentioned, we can just bring back the Raptite, and now we're just swimming in follow-up at that point. So yeah, we can actually successfully play through those disruptions. You could argue that maybe we could have held, or our opponent could have held a Gamma, or like the dummy opponent, which was me. But if you risk hitting Guardian off of the Researcher, then like it really does hurt. Plus, like getting the body off the board isn't too bad either. And like when you have it in combination with Ogre, like again, like you might just see that, Gamma-ing the Researcher and Ogre-ing the Fiber, if they don't have the follow-up, is going to be the end of the turn. And again, you can also make the argument that like, well, they didn't use Doki yet, so that like could be a flawed sort of perception. But it also could have been just the same that the other 2 cards in hand were just hand traps instead. And one of them was the Leonite, which we couldn't, use with Doki anyways. But that is going to do it, and now we're going to finish off the video with some ending thoughts. Alright guys, so that's going to actually conclude the Adamancipator test hand video for November 2020. Hopefully you guys did enjoy and got to see some of the situations you might find yourselves in, playing against different hand traps with various hands and how you might be able to structure things based on what you come across with your excavates and such. Obviously, it's not perfect as far as the simulation is concerned, but it should give you a pretty well-rounded approach, I hope, against various disruptions your opponent might actually play against you. But that's going to do for the video, guys. If you did enjoy what you see, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me using the links in the description box down below. And until next time, I will catch you in the next video. See you guys.